there, welcome to 412 Canada. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kim Hutchins, and at 412 we are equipping the church for greater influence through serving. 412 is a ministry of Faith Baptist Church in Huntsville, Ontario. We're so excited to be able to continue to equip you as a podcast and now on YouTube. As I mentioned on episode 20 of the 412 Canada podcast, we are not able to have our conference this spring as we had planned. However, we have this unique opportunity to bring guests that I know will encourage and equip you as you serve and in your walk with Jesus. Today, we have Rich Birch joining us. He's the Executive Director at Camp Minneowi and the founder of unSeminary. Thanks so much for joining us, Rich.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. It's so fun. It's a very nice living room you have here, Kim.
Thank you.
It's very nice.
I was hoping it'd be inviting.
It's great. Love it.
Well, and you know I love to sit down and have coffee with anybody, and I'm super excited to chat with you today. Now, a lot of our discussion is going to get into in the context of the pandemic and all that's been happening. But before we do that, tell me a little bit, how are you doing?
Great. Oh, that's a great question. It's always fun when people ask that, right? Like,
Yeah.
How are you doing? Yeah, doing fine. You know, I think this has been an interesting year in a lot of ways. And I'm bummed that the conference isn't happening this spring. It was such a highlight 2 years ago. But I love that you guys are pivoting and trying to find a new way. And I feel like that's been this last year, right? We've all tried new things, learned new skills. And that's really been, my story and in the stuff that I serve in, whether it's at camp or at unSeminary, we've tried some new stuff and tried to learn. So I think in the long arc, I think it's going to be great. In the middle of it, it's like, there's some pain associated with that. But, I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, and can you tell us, for those who maybe don't know all that you do, explain a little bit about what you do at Minneowi, and then we'll talk about unSeminary as well.
Yeah, great. So Camp Minneowi, we're here in Muskoka, right around the corner from the church, and our mission is to develop tomorrow's leaders through life-changing adventure in God's creation. We really primarily see ourselves actually as a youth leadership development organization that runs a kids camp. Now, this last year has been strange because we, overnight kids camps were closed by the provincial government last May, and actually at the time of recording continue to be closed, which does put our kind of everything we do in question. And so it has been very strange. And so we were able to pivot pretty hard last summer and tried a bunch of new things. And if you would have asked me 2 months ago, I was like, of course we're going to open this summer, no problem. We're still running very much in that direction, but it's unknown even at this point. So,
true, right?
We'll have about 2,500 kids this summer, about 250 young leaders that we hire. And so, it's a fun mission to be a part of. It's exciting, and it's always great to work with young leaders, and it's such a fascinating time in their lives as they kind of are coming out of high school, going into university, thinking about what they're doing in life, all of that.
I know, it's such a great opportunity for them too as well, right? Like I think of the training that I had at Minneowi, and you just use that in everything that you do.
Yeah.
So
well, and this, Kim, but like leadership isn't the kind of thing that's taught in a classroom. You can learn things by reading and being in a classroom, but the way you learn to lead is you lead. And so the great thing about a place like Minneowi, or like there's lots of great Christian camps, that it's a great kind of test bed or laboratory for young leaders to learn how to lead. I know that was my experience as a young leader. It was the first place, I've said this in so many conversations, it's the first place that really trusted me to lead when they probably shouldn't have trusted me, but they do, and we've still done that.
Yeah.
This is our 75th summer. For 75 years, we've been trusting young leaders to lead, probably before we should, but in that process, man, they learn a ton and grow. And it's a safe environment. Obviously, there's lots of great adults around to provide support, but it's great. It's so fun to be a part of, for sure.
Yeah. And unSeminary, that's a blog that you started. And tell us just a little bit about that. And,
Great question. So unSeminary, our kind of tagline is stuff you wish they taught in seminary. So it's been going for. We started in 2009, so it's been rolling for quite a while. And we're probably 1,200, 1,300 articles, over 500, podcast interviews and it's all really around this idea of how can we help churches reach more people and kind of maximize what they do. For years, there's this joke, if you hang around church leadership for a while, oftentimes people will joke, and this year has been one of those years where people are like, well, they didn't teach me about how to lead through a pandemic. They didn't have that in seminary.
No.
And so that's really what we try to talk to, is all the stuff they don't talk about in seminary. And with a particular emphasis, I would say, particularly on church growth, helping churches reach more people, helping them, be more effective and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's so amazing. I took a quick look at your site beforehand, so I know later we'll talk more about that, whether on this episode or the next. But you have such a wealth of knowledge, right, with volunteers and that. And so I just wondered if you could tell me some of the best ways to engage volunteers, especially during this season right now.
Great question.
What have you found is working?
Yeah, great question. So there is no doubt a volunteer crisis at churches all across the country. So, Americans, they have way better statistics on this stuff because they're better at studying themselves than Canadians are. So I know that this is on the YouTube, which at some point, the problem with it being on YouTube is I feel like someone's going to like jump out and scare me or something. Isn't that what YouTube's all about? Or like this table's going to explove or something. Like, this is all a big
crazy. This is
a big setup. This is but anyways, that's beside this. We have really good statistics, particularly from our American brothers and sisters about what's happening in the church. And we did a study late last year, and we found that 3/4 of the churches that we studied. It was a national survey where it said that their volunteer corps had shrunk in the last year, which is understandable, right? Like it's the middle of the pandemic. I get that. Like that's what has happened. The problem with that for your church and mine is I believe deeply. This is one of the things why I love 412 and everything you do here. I believe deeply that volunteering isn't so much about what we can get from our people. It's not that we need people to work in kids ministry. It's not that we need people to do sound. It's not we need people to greet. We need to create opportunities for our people. We're not trying to get something from them. We want something for them. And what that is opportunities for them to flex their other-centered muscles, opportunities for them to live a life that's other-centered. Ultimately, that's what we believe that following Jesus is all about. It's about orienting our lives around the needs of other people. That is who we follow. Like we follow a God that points us in that direction. And volunteering is a way to flex that. It's not the only way to do that, but it's a way to kind of exercise that, to say, hey, what am I doing to kind of orient my life around other people? And so one of the problems is if all of our churches are seeing a decline in volunteering, particularly in this season, the long-term effect could be profound on the local church. If we're not providing opportunities for people to live an other-centered life, man, that's going to create a problem long-term from a discipleship point of view. Now, the other one, which is a major piece as well, I would say it goes hand in hand with that, is the decline of volunteering is a problem from a church growth point of view. We know that churches that grow, churches that are making an impact in their community, really the only difference between churches that are stagnant or decline and churches that are growing, really the only difference is growing churches are ones where the church is equipping their people to invite their friends, to be engaged with their community. And we know from all kinds of studies that people who volunteer are those people who are most likely to do that. So there's like a need for our people from a discipleship point of view and a need from our church's point of view. If we're not engaging people, we're losing opportunities for us to engage with the broader culture. So, what does all that mean? For you and for
Break
me,
it down.
what does all that mean? I think currently, like when we think about volunteering at our churches, if we're a church leader, if you're listening in and you lead at a church or you lead a team at a church, we often have the orientation in our brain around, okay, well, I need people to do X, like I talked about. We need people to run kids ministry. We need people to do all those things. But very few people, a minority of people, single digits, maybe 5% tops, of people who volunteer with us, that's their primary motivation for serving. Very few people come to us and say, I know that the church has a need. I would like to serve, to fulfill that need. Now, most of the people who are leading, they're actually those people. Their primary orientation is like, I want to help. But that's not actually why most people volunteer. Most people volunteer because they're looking for friends. They're looking for a connection, community with other people. That they're looking for the secondary benefit of, like, I know other people at the church. I have relationships with other people. And so if we're trying to create a compelling volunteer culture, we have to work backwards from how will people develop relationships in all of this? How will they walk out with more friends? That's even more so in this season. After coming out of a year basically now of people being socially distanced, being relationally distant from each other. I don't know if you've probably had these conversations where it feels like we have to relearn how to be friends again. It's like we have to.
True,
the other day, I probably shouldn't say this because of the current lockdown state we're in. I had a friend of mine. He hugged me, and it was like the man hug is always a little bit
It's gotta be
awkward, but it was like quadruply awkward because we haven't done that in a year, and it was appropriate in the conversation with what we were saying, at the time. But So we've got to, from a volunteering point of view, got to work backwards from how do we make this a real connection experience? How do we make this so when people come, the thing that at the end we look back, we say, oh, those people have deeper relationships with each other, and not so much did they just get stuff done in our world. We could talk more about that, but that would be my favorite.
And let's go down that trail for a second in church trends. What have you seen are churches that are doing well connecting and making those relationships? Like, what is it that they are doing to reach out to their volunteers, especially those that they haven't seen for a while, right? Like they're in lockdown or they're just not coming back. So what steps have they taken?
Great question. So yeah, for sure we're seeing, so in some ways you can learn from the extremes and you can learn from the churches who have not done a good job on this. So please, friends, if you're thinking about doing what I'm telling you, do not do it. So we've heard of and we've seen churches that maybe they've been, we're all experiencing this up and down in some way or another across the country where it's like they kind of change, everything's changing, the variants, all that stuff. And so what we've seen are churches just put people back on rosters and say, hey, we'll see you in 2 weeks. You're serving in, I'll keep picking on kids ministry. You're serving in, the toddlers or maybe even worse, junior high, like show up for the, grade 5 boys class. And shocker, that's not going over well. Like people are not like, oh, I'm just ready to come back. I'm ready to join in.
It's true, right? They're not. That's not helpful right now.
And so what I think we've got to do, and what we're seeing a number of prevailing churches do, is actually add a step before that. So before we even try to push people back into serving, it's getting back to that relational thing and saying, hey, we've got to get these people back together, relating to each other again. We've got to remind them again, oh, right, I like these people. I would like to serve with these people. And so the thing I keep saying to churches is, before you try, if you're a part of the process of rebuilding your teams needs to be a pre-step, which is let's get those people back together in some sort of social environment. So here we're recording this in the spring. This is a great time to say, let's plan some sort of picnic where we're getting all these folks back together. Let's get some sort of social event together. It's not an information meeting. No. It's not a come and learn about our social distancing protocols and whether you have to wear a mask or not. It's not an interest meeting. It's not saying, are you interested in volunteering? It's saying, we're getting a social event together for all the people who have served on our teams. And the goal is to get people together and have fun. It's 90%, 80% people connecting. The takeaway from it is, do people walk away knowing more people? That's what we're trying to drive towards. And then secondarily is that they would know something about what's happening, in our volunteer culture. We're seeing that churches that are taking that step are seeing higher return rates. They're seeing people actually engage because people are reminded again, oh yeah, this is a good thing to do. It's fun. If you've been distanced for a while and you finally get back together with some other people, you're reminded again, oh yeah, this is better than sitting on the couch. Oh yeah, this is better than staying at home, which is like, that's just, it's appealing to like stay at home and not do these things.
Right?
And so that kind of, and we can talk more about that, but we've been calling them connection events. These idea of how do we get people back connecting with each other, again, relationally, not so much with here's what we're trying to do as a church, but with each other. Yeah,
and it's so interesting in a year how we've forgotten how much in relationships are important, right? And to get together with people. And I think it's not until you connect with somebody that you realize you've missed it.
Yes.
Right? Like you just absolutely are realizing, wow, I've missed out on a lot. I've missed that human connection.
Yes.
So that's so good to hear you say that.
Yeah, I was talking to a church recently they're pushing a giant ball up this hill. They're in an area that's has been open for a while, but as a church, so there were 7 campuses before COVID. They only have 3 of their locations open. Pre-COVID, they had about 2,000 volunteers. It's a big church, 2,000 volunteers that were serving on a regular basis, but they're down to less than 100 because of all of how it's all worked. And they were reflecting recently. They said, we got our staff together, and it was the first time in over a year that they got their staff team. It's a large church. They got their staff team together, and there was like this eruption of joy, just of like, wow, it's so good to be together, right? And multiple people I had heard, because I was talking to a couple people that were in this conversation, and they were like, yeah, it was like I was reminded again, oh, right, like I really love these people. I love working with these people. I love being together. And again, I think we have to remind people as leaders, we've got to remind people of that before they're willing to jump back in with the grade 5 boys class. Like that just is, they're looking for something else. And the other part of it that frankly we have to wrestle out is there is some concern around kind of the return to church, and there's a wide spectrum there. There's some people that I think are probably over obsessed with like we got to get people back into our buildings, and that's like a whole other conversation. And then there's people that are like, it doesn't matter, buildings don't matter. I'm probably somewhere in the middle where I'm like, I don't think that the gathered body of Christ is going anywhere. I think church online is great, and I think we've all seen in this last year, it is helping us reach people that we normally wouldn't reach. That's all amazing, but I do think that we will get back to, and we should be getting back to, in-person experiences of some sort as a part of our ministry mix. But the reality of it is we've got to get our volunteers to be more comfortable than the general public with that. So we know there's hesitancy. That's all across North America. There's hesitancy with, I was talking to a church leader just yesterday, again, a fairly large church, but he was kind of bemoaning a little bit. He's like, I can't believe people aren't coming back. And he was talking about how at their, and this fits in their region, it works for where they are. He was talking about at one of their campuses, they're only seeing about 200 people come. And it's a big room. I've been in that room. It's probably 1,500 seats. And it's
my goodness.
that doesn't feel great. But I said, man, like that is probably the largest crowd that all of those people have been in the last year. Like there's nowhere else that people are gathering with 200 people.
No.
And we've got to get our volunteers to be more comfortable than the general public, because we can't host people until we get volunteers comfortable. And so what we can't kind of wait for the people that are just waiting around, the churches that are waiting around for like, let's wait until people are ready to come back. Well, that's not going to happen. We have to get our teams more comfortable because we need them to then host other people. So by definition, we've got to go ahead and come up with other strategies, which I would say are these kind of connection. How do we get people connected relationally? And you could do it in small groups. There's lots of ways to do that. But the big issue is, how do we get people reminded, I actually love these people. I love getting back together. I love, connecting and seeing folks.
Yeah, and what have you found for the church trend of those not returning? Like, is it a big percentage?
Yeah, there has been, our friends at Barna did a study where they've looked at this pretty consistently over the last year, and the number that keeps coming back is 1 in 5 people who attended church in the first quarter of 2020 have not attended online or in person a service over a year later. And that anecdotally works out. As I talk to church leaders across the country, because everybody does this math where they're like, well, we have this number of people that are attending in person, and we have this number of people that are on our online, and we somehow do some magic math and figure out. But people are short. People are like, we're feeling pretty good. We're like maybe 80% of where we were before. Like I've heard that so many times, and so anecdotally that works out. Which is, if that's true, like wow, what a profound change that 20% of people who used to attend our churches aren't attending anymore. That's
crazy,
profound.
Right?
That's like one of those, we can't just roll over that. We have to think really strategically about that. What are we going to do? And again, I'm not so obsessed with how do we get them in the building. It's more how do we reconnect with those people, because those people were having some sort of journey with us. I think we have some sort of responsibility to steward those relationships well. And again, that's a whole other conversation, but I do think we need to be thinking about those things.
Like how do you work to build community with those that have not been coming back in a year, right?
So I think a part of what we've seen, and I would say it has become a best practice. It's like old school. It's like when you and I started in ministry so many years ago, back in the 90s. Like it's we used to do phone trees where we would like phone people. Like it'd be like you call 10 people who call 10 people.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that happen at churches all over the place where they're re-employing this like old school idea of like, hey, we're going to actually just get on the phone, like the actual phone, pick up the phone and call people. And
That's
part of that,
shocking, really,
it's
nowadays.
so shocking. You're like, what are you talking about? But time and again, we see like people saying, wow, this has been great. And then on the receiving end, people love it. They're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they reached out to me. And part of it is they're not like, it's not a collections call. It's not like, hey, you owe the church something, you better show up. That's not what it is. It's some kind person like you calling and saying, hey, it's Kim calling from the church. We just want to check in. How are you doing? Like, what can we do? How can we love you? And is there anything we can help with? And what'll happen as people at the church that have done that, you find that 20% pretty quickly. You figure out, here's people who have not been a part of the church, and then we can learn and listen. and understand what's happening there. What is,
Yeah.
what's going on? How can we, help you connect or not? Or maybe it's they've gone somewhere else or, but I don't think we can just let kind of those people slip out the back
No.
door. I do think as we're kind of rebuilding our kind of regathering plans, as we're figuring out what does it look like to live in this kind of hybrid world of church online and in-person services, I do think we have to be thinking about that kind of fall through the cracks factor and how are we, working with that. And every church is going to look different in every church, but I think it's an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and so I also thought over this last year, ministry has changed so much, right? And do you find that churches are rebuilding the way they do ministry completely, right? I know even here we have focused more on production, our hosting, and just reaching out in small groups. But youth is different, kidsmen is different. Everything has kind of changed. And what are you seeing maybe in the church trends? Like, how are people rebuilding? Like, are they just starting over? Are they keeping some of the ideas, or just are they finding new ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not of the school of thought that it's like everything's changed and never's going to go back anywhere. Like, I just don't think that's true. Like, I think there are some fundamentals of what we've done that are going to continue to go forward. And partly that's because people have the same problems. Like parents are still lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, maybe even more so, and wondering, how am I going to raise my kids? What am I going to do? And the church has an answer for that, right?
Yeah.
There are marriages that are on the brink of catastrophic failure. The church has an answer for that. And then ultimately we have the ultimate answer for, I feel disconnected to the universe. What's happening? Like there's something broken inside of me. We have the answer. It's Jesus. That hasn't changed. So the core of what we offer hasn't changed. But I do think that we are seeing an acceleration of a bunch of different factors. Your church was doing church online beforehand, and now like every church is doing, church online. Even just look locally, like you guys were an innovator on that front. There wasn't every church in town that was doing that. Now, the small, mainline church that's got 35 people has figured out how to do that. I don't think that's going away. I think there are the dynamics that has put into people's lives. There will be people who will say, this is just better. Like, I am just more interested in this online thing. Where I think before, if we were honest, and I've been doing church online since 2009, so I've been doing it for years. I think we saw it as an add-on. That's not true anymore. It has shifted into, it is like if you were in a multi-site church, it's another campus. It's like, it is core to who you do, who you are. And so all the stuff that your church and other churches have done to learn to get better at communicating through that channel has not been lost, will be super helpful going forward. I do also think that there's an opportunity there to take lessons that we learned from this primarily online environment and try to apply those to our in-person environments. So as an example, we now have statistics on, and worship people are not going to like me when I say this, we now have statistics on what people think of, or at least how they respond to, how they engage with the worship portion of what we do, the musical worship portion of what we do on a Sunday morning. And so the question, because we put so many people through online, we now have stats on that. The question is, we can choose to just ignore that as church leaders and say, let's just do let's just do our services, our in-person services like we did before. I don't think that's the right move. I think we should be saying, okay, what did we learn over this last year about engaging people, about helping them stay connected, all that to communicate with them? What did we learn? And I'm picking on worship people, but there's all kinds of ways. We've had to get better at production. We should have been better at that stuff before, right? We should have been crisper on our communication. We should have figured out, how do we narrow down? We can't talk about 12 things. We got to talk about 1 or 2 things. Like we have to be more visual. All of those things we've learned over this last year. I think the question is now, how do we apply those to our in-person services and not just go back to where we were before? In light of the fact that I do think we're going to end up, back in a similar environment to where we were. People are going to come back and attend, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. And it might be smaller for a while. I think we have to get comfortable. For a while, right? Yeah, the thing I keep saying to people is what we can't do is fixate on. We used to have 120 people in our services. Now we only have 60, and we are failures unless we get back to 120. I just don't think, I think that's an inaccurate way to look at it. There's enough has shifted that it's like we need to really start with, okay, we had 60 this weekend, great. Where are we 2 months from now? Are we at 64? Great, we're seeing a trajectory in the right direction, and not be so obsessed with let's jump this bar, because I just don't. I think and we're still in the pandemic. Even if you have
it's still changing
American
all the time.
viewers, like I know they're all convinced that it's over, but it's not. Like we still have a long ways to go on how this is impacting our church. So maybe a few things.
Yeah, well, and I'm just thinking as we start to think about wrapping up this session, for those that have been serving this last year, right? They have faithfully, whether now they've switched and they've been serving online, maybe hosting in that way, or they're trying out production, or they've just have continued to serve faithfully. What's something that you could say that would encourage them to keep going? And for those who have been leading volunteers this past year, just something that would encourage them.
I love that. I know at our church there's a dear saint who through this entire thing. So our church has not done in-person services yet. Like, you guys are super innovative. We've been like, no, we can't do that yet. And we're probably still, frankly, at the time of recording, a month and 2 months away. Like it's not, we're not rushing to that. But there's this dear saint of our church who was or ran a guest connections team, like ushers, greeters, that kind of thing, at one of our campuses, and has every week for this entire time has reached out to her team, has like connected with them. Hey, what's going on? How can I help you? How can we serve? Has done like, hey, let's get everybody together on Zoom and have game night and all that. And I, my heart, I'm a little choked up even thinking about it. Like my heart goes out to leaders like that who through the season have said, hey, we want to stay connected. I want to figure out how we can, and I think those folks, will look back and be like, man, like God did just such a huge work through those people, and that we won't really know the impact of it for, I think, a long time to come. We're going to look back on that, I think, with a different kind of clarity than even, we have now. So I would say thank you. Wow, it's amazing that people have continued to serve. And thank you, people have flexed. I was talking to a leader recently who, it's like they've done everything. They've done everything that's not what they normally do in the last year. They've tried all this new stuff to try to help because they just buy the mission. They're like, we want to help.
Yeah.
And man, I would be like, let's keep that. How do we keep that spirit? I think there's something there that like, oh, we want to keep doing that. An example from the marketplace. So I had heard this story about Ford. So Ford Motor Company, they early in the pandemic got in. There was a whole conversation about ventilators. I don't even remember last spring. It was like, we need ventilators, we need ventilators. And so Ford in 90 days went from, we're going to change a production line from making cars to making ventilators. From the day they made a decision, it was 90 days from that day to when the first ventilator came off.
That's fast.
Which is crazy, right? Think about that. It's like a 100-year-old company that's been making cars, has never done medical equipment, and is like, we're going to make medical equipment because they saw a call to it. And I heard the CEO of Ford, and I forget her name. Oh, that's so terrible. She was saying internally now they talk about, well, we need to be ventilator fast. We need to be, ventilator flexible. We need to be, ventilator innovative. Like they see it as like this innovation point. And I would say that for our churches, like how can we take the season and propel that into the next season? Because we need that. We need to keep thinking, how do we do new things? How do we, try new stuff? And let's not lose that spirit and just rush to get back to what we did before. That's boring. Let's try to innovate beyond here.
Yeah, well, this has been so great, Rich. I am so excited, and I think it's been so encouraging to listen to what you've had to say. You're so innovative, and I love hearing different trends and what's going on kind of through the country in Canada and just even through North America. I love that you have a hand on that.
Thanks so much.
So listeners, I don't want you to miss an episode. We're going to be having Rich on again. So if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, remember to subscribe to your podcast app. And for those that are watching the video edition, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode. Also, hop onto the discussion and follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at 412 Canada. Thanks for watching.